Okay. All right, we are recording, so let us recite Namo Tassa 3 times. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okie dokes. So, last week we read the story of Nanda, the Buddha's half sister, and how Nanda originally became a nun or joined the Sangha simply to follow in the footsteps of the rest of her relatives and family members. So not initially out of faith and confidence in the Buddha. And she was also very beautiful as a person. So she had this strong attachment to her beauty. And so the Buddha used certain skillful means to guide Nanda, and eventually Nanda also gained confidence in Triple Gem, and also became very well established in her practice. Okay, so this week we'll read Queen Sāmāvatī's story. So Queen Sāmāvatī is the embodiment of loving kindness. So in the days when India was the fortunate home of an awakened one, that means a Buddha, a husband and wife lived within its borders with their only daughter named Sāmāvatī, who was exceedingly beautiful. And their family life was a happy and harmonious one. But the one day disaster struck. Pestilence broke out in their hometown, and the couple, along with their grown-up daughter, fled from the area. And they headed for Kosambi, the capital of the kingdom of Vamsa in the Ganges Valley, intending to seek support from her father's old friend, Gosaka, a finance minister of the king. And within the city, the municipality had erected a public alms hall for the refugees. There, the daughter Sāmāvatī went to obtain food. And the first day she took 3 portions, and the second day she took 2 portions, and on the third day only 1 portion. Now, Metta, the man who was distributing the food, could not resist asking her, somewhat ironically, whether she had finally realized the capacity of her stomach. So he was a little bit sarcastic in a sense. And Sāmāvatī replied quite calmly, "On the first day, there were 3 of us, my parents and myself. And that day, my father succumbed to the plague. So that means her father died after the first day. And so on the second day, I needed food for only 2 people. Then on the second day after the meal, my mother died. And so today I now need food for myself alone. Her parents actually succumbed to the plague one after the other. So the official, Metta, felt ashamed of his sarcastic remark and wholeheartedly begged her forgiveness. And a long conversation ensued, and when he found out that she was now all alone in the world, he proposed to adopt her as his foster child. So he adopted her. And she was happy to accept because she didn't know anyone, right? They fled from their old kingdom. So Sāmāvatī immediately began helping her foster father with the distribution of the food and the care of the refugees. That means the others who also ran from their kingdom. And thanks to her efficiency and circumspection, the former chaos became channeled into orderly activity. And nobody tried to get ahead of others anymore. Nobody quarreled, and everyone was content. So she was pretty good at keeping order. And soon Gosaka was her father's friend. Yeah. Gosaka, the king's finance minister, became aware that the public food distribution was taking place without noise and tumult. That means it was very orderly. And when he expressed his praise and appreciation to the food distributor, that means to Metta, the one who adopted Sāmāvatī, right? So then Metta replied modestly that his foster daughter was mainly responsible for this. So in this way, Gosaka met Sāmāvatī, the orphan daughter of his late friend. And he was so impressed with her noble bearing that he decided to adopt her as his own daughter. And his manager consented, even if somewhat woefully, because he did not want to stand in the way of Sāmāvatī's fortune. So Metta initially adopted Sāmāvatī, but then Gosaka was so impressed, and Gosaka thought, oh, this was my late friend's daughter, so I will adopt her. And so Metta was like, okay, because if the king's finance minister want to adopt, then of course he has to let that happen. So Gosaka then took her into his house because he's finance minister, right? So I guess he felt like, it's my friend, my late friend's daughter. She doesn't have anybody now, so I should take care of her. And thereby, because he adopted her, so I'm assuming that Gosaka had no other children, so thereby she became heiress of a vast estate. That means she became heir to Gosaka's estate and mixed with the most exalted circles of the land. That means she started mixing with the network in Gosaka's circle, because Gosaka was finance minister, so obviously his network would be either people, other ministers, or I don't know, fairly rich people and things like that. Okay, and obviously possibly royal family as well, because Gosaka was the king's finance minister. Then the king, who was living in Kosambi at that time, was named Udena. So King Udena had two chief consorts. Consorts means queen. Okay. One was Vasudadatta, whom he married both for political reasons and because she was very beautiful. So this first queen, Vasudadatta, was very beautiful. But also, in the days of the past, sometimes, when two kingdoms want to befriend each other, then they marry their princes or prince or whatever. Yeah, so it could be because of that. Yeah. And the second queen, her name was Māgandiyā. So Māgandiyā was beautiful and clever, but cold and self-centered. Okay, so the first one, Queen Vasudadatta, the King Udena married for political reasons. The second one, Queen Māgandiyā, was beautiful as well, but a little bit more self-centered. That means most of the time just thinks about herself. Okay. And neither could offer the king the warmth of loving affection and emotional contentment that he craved. Now, one day, King Udena met the charming adopted daughter of his finance minister. That means Sāmāvatī. So he met Sāmāvatī and fell in love with her at first sight. He felt magically attracted by her loving and generous nature. And Sāmāvatī had exactly what was missing in both his other wives. So King Udena sent a messenger to Gosaka asking him to give Sāmāvatī to him in marriage. That means the king wanted to marry Sāmāvatī. Now Gosaka was thrown into an emotional upheaval. Okay. So on the one hand, he loved Sāmāvatī, his adopted daughter, above all else, and she had become indispensable to him. I mean, she helped him a lot. Okay. And she was the delight of his life because quite likely he had no other children. Excuse me. Now, on the other hand, he knew his king's temperament and was afraid to deny him his request. So probably King Udena, based on what this is suggesting, probably King Udena is the type of king that is, must have his way. Otherwise, uh, he will be, very cruel, let's say. Some kings are like that. They must have their way or else. It's their way or the highway. You know. So he was kind of in a little bit of a dilemma. He knew King Udena was going to punish him if he didn't give uh, you know, let Sāmāvatī become queen. But at the same time, he uh, loves Sāmāvatī as a daughter very much. So in the end, his Gosaka's attachment to Sāmāvatī won, and he thought, better to die than to live without her. That means he was really attached to the daughter, Sāmāvatī, that he thought, fine, if King Udena wants to, I don't know, chop my head or something, kill me, so be it. And then, as usual, King Udena lost his temper. He became very angry. And in his fury, he dismissed Gosaka from his post as finance minister, banned him from his kingdom. That means kind of expelled Gosaka, not only expelled him as a finance minister, but expelled him from the kingdom of, what is the kingdom's name again? Vamsa. banned him from the kingdom of Vamsa, banned him, expelled him as his post as finance minister, and also did not allow Sāmāvatī to accompany him. So that's like whammy, triple whammy, so to speak. Then the king took over his minister Ghosaka's property and locked up his magnificent mansion. So Sāmāvatī was desolate. She was really upset that Ghosaka, her adopted father, had to suffer so much on her account and had lost not only her, but also his home and belongings. So out of compassion for her adopted daughter, to whom she was devoted with great gratitude, because Ghosaka took her, adopted her after her parents, passed away. So out of that great gratitude, she decided to make an end to this dispute by voluntarily becoming the king's wife. So she then agreed to become a consort. So she went to the palace and informed the king of her decision. And the king was immediately appeased and restored Ghosaka to his former position. That means restored Ghosaka to be finance minister. Also rescinding all other measures against him. That means gave him back his belongings, his house, his treasures, everything. Okay? And because Sāmāvatī had great love for everyone, she had so much inner strength that this decision was not a difficult one for her. It was not important to her where she lived, whether in the house of the finance minister as his favorite daughter, or in the palace as the favorite wife of the king, or in obscurity as when she was in the house of her parents, or as a poor refugee. To her, it didn't really make a difference. She always found peace in her own heart and was happy regardless of outer circumstances. Now, Sāmāvatī's life at the royal court fell into a harmonious pattern. And among her servants, there was one named Khujjuttarā. Okay, now Khujjuttarā was outwardly ugly and ill-formed. That means she wasn't very pleasant to look at. Yeah, but otherwise very capable. So even though Khujjuttarā wasn't very pretty, but very capable. So every day the queen, Sāmāvatī, gave her 8 gold coins to buy flowers for the women's quarters of the palace. But Khujjuttarā always bought only 4 coins worth of flowers and used the remaining 4 coins for herself. One day when she went to buy flowers for her mistress, the florist informed her that this day he had invited the Buddha and his order of monks for a meal. And he urged Khujjuttarā to participate. That means the florist asked Khujjuttarā, hey, come along. I've invited the Buddha for a meal, dana. Yeah, come along. And following the meal, the Buddha gave a discourse to his hosts, and as he spoke, his words went directly to Khujjuttarā's heart. And listening with total attention, tranquil and uplifted, she took in every word as though it was intended just for her. And by the time the Buddha concluded his talk, she had attained the path and fruit of stream entry. And without quite knowing what had happened to her, Khujjuttarā had become a totally changed person, one endowed with unwavering faith in the Triple Gem and incapable of violating the basic laws of morality. That means she is not capable of breaking any of the precepts. And the whole world, which had always seemed so obvious and real to her, now appeared as a dream. And the first thing she did after this spectacular inner transformation was to buy flowers for all the 8 coins, deeply regretting her former dishonesty. So she started to regret. Previously she always only used half of what the queen gave her. So now first thing she did, she didn't become dishonest, used all the 8 coins the queen gave her to buy the flowers the queen asked. And when the queen asked her, Khujjuttarā, why there were suddenly so many flowers, then Khujjuttarā fell at the queen's feet and confessed her theft. And after Sāmāvatī forgave her magnanimously, that means the queen was very open-hearted and just said, that's okay, no problem. Yeah. Khujjuttarā then told her what was closest to her heart, namely, that she had heard a discourse by the Buddha which had changed her life. Now, she could not be specific about the contents of the teaching, but Sāmāvatī could see for herself what a wholesome and healing impact it had made on her servant. So I guess the queen was quite impressed, what is it that the Buddha taught that this servant of mine who always was dishonest with these 8 gold coins suddenly changed. So what made her change so drastically? Who is this person? Got Sāmāvatī a little bit curious, yeah. So then she appointed Khujjuttarā her personal attendant, yeah, and she told Khujjuttarā to visit the monastery every day to listen to the Dhamma and then repeat it to her and the other women of the palace. Now, Khujjuttarā had an outstanding memory, and what she had heard only once, she could repeat verbatim. So a little bit like Venerable Ananda, let's say. It means anything she went to listen to the Dhamma, the Buddha's discourse, let's say, she can come back to the palace. She can repeat word for word. Verbatim means word for word, exactly word for word. So she do that every day. So each day, when she returned from the monastery, the high-bred women of the palace, that means either the women of the royal family, say, all those royal family, female royal family members of the palace, yeah, they would place her on a high seat as if she were the Buddha himself. And sitting down below, they would listen devotedly to the discourse. So this is quite impressive because Khujjuttarā was kind of like a servant in the palace. But now the royal women are treating her like she was, someone of great influence, or like treating, because she's repeating what the Buddha's discourse word for word. So they kind of, put her on a high seat as though they are listening to the Buddha himself directly. And later on, Khujjuttarā made a collection of the short discourses she had heard from the Buddha, which became the book of the Pāli canon, now called the Itivuttaka, the Buddha sayings, composed of 112 suttas in mixed prose and verse. So the Itivuttaka is part of the 5th book Khuddaka Nikaya, which is a collection of different, um, shorter teachings, let's say. In fact, I think Bhante Dhamma read once or twice from the Itivuttaka. So in that Nikaya, there's also like the Thera that falls in there, the Udana, the Jataka tales, um, and a couple of other things. I can't remember exactly. Yeah. So whatever doesn't fall into the Digha Nikaya, the long discourses, Majjhima Nikaya, medium length discourses, the Anguttara Nikaya, which is the kindred teachings, um, Samyutta Nikaya. Anything that doesn't fall into those will fall into the fifth set, which is the Khuddaka Nikaya. All right, so the Itivuttaka is one of those that is found in the Khuddaka Nikaya. So now we learned something today that actually the origins of the Itivuttaka actually came from what Khujjuttarā had heard from the Buddha and repeated word for word. Okay, so that is the origins of the Itivuttaka, or the Buddha's sayings. So when King Udena once again told his beloved queen, Sāmāvatī, that she could wish for anything and he would fulfill it. Then she wished that the Buddha would come to the palace daily to have his food there and propound his doctrine. That's what the queen wished. So the king's courier took the message of this perpetual invitation to the Buddha, but the Buddha declined and instead sent for Ananda. So then from then on, the Venerable Ananda then went to the palace daily for his meal and afterwards gave a Dhamma discourse. So just as in the tradition, even until today, whenever monks are invited to somebody's place, house, or even within temple, let's say, after a meal, after the lunch dana, it is usually followed by Dhamma talk, Dhamma discourse. So it's to carry on from the tradition even during the time of the Buddha himself. And the queen has, sorry about that. The queen had already been well prepared by Khujjuttarā's reports. That means by then Khujjuttarā was already, sharing the daily discourses from the Buddha already, the teachings of the Buddha. So she already was well familiar with the Buddha's Dhamma. So by the time Venerable Ananda came to the palace daily and then give a Dhamma talk daily after the meal, within a short time, the queen understood the meaning of the teachings of the Buddha, and she herself also attained to Sri Mantri, just as Khujjuttarā, her maidservant, had done. Now, through their common understanding of the Dhamma, the queen and the maid became equals. I mean, both of them Sri Mantras. And within a short time, the teaching spread through the whole of the women's quarters. And there was hardly anyone who did not become a disciple of the awakened one, the Buddha. And even Sāmāvatī's stepfather, that means the finance minister Goska, even he was deeply touched by the teaching. So he donated a large monastery in Kosambi to the Sangha so that the monks would have a secure and satisfying shelter when they came to the city. So because finance minister Goska was very rich, so he also donated this large monastery in Kosambi. So anytime the monks and the Buddha come to Kosambi, they can stay at this monastery. And every time the Buddha visited Kosambi, he stayed in this monastery. The monastery name is Gosittarama. And other monks and holy people also found shelter there. And through the influence of the Dhamma, Sāmāvatī became determined to develop her abilities more intensively. And her most important asset, her most important quality, was the way she could feel sympathy for all beings and could suffuse everyone with loving kindness and compassion. And she was able to develop this faculty so strongly that the Buddha called her the woman lay disciple most skilled in spreading metta, loving kindness. So her practice, Queen Sāmāvatī's practice of metta was so strong, so strong. She became foremost female disciple, a lay disciple in practicing metta. And this all-pervading love was soon to be tested severely in her relationship, Queen Sāmāvatī's relationship, with the second main consort of the king, Māgandiyā. Remember, Queen Māgandiyā was very beautiful, but she was also very self-centered. I mean, most of the time she only thinks about herself. Now, this woman was imbued with virulent hatred against everything Buddhist. Virulent hatred, so like a virus. Her hatred towards everything the Buddha taught or the Buddha resembled was like a virus. That kind of hate she had. And some years earlier, her father had met the Buddha, and it had seemed to him that the handsome ascetic, because the Buddha was apparently fairly handsome, good looking, also because very radiant. Yeah, the Buddha's very radiant. Okay, so the father for some reason thought that the Buddha was the most worthy of candidates to marry his daughter, Māgandiyā. So the father was obviously very ignorant of who or what the Buddha resembled. And in his naive ignorance of the rules of monks, the father offered his daughter to the Buddha as his wife. So obviously, I think the father was naive, but also ignorant, doesn't understand what the meaning of being a monk is, let alone probably didn't quite understand what a Buddha is. Yeah. So then Māgandiyā was very beautiful, and her hand had already been sought by many suitors. But the Buddha declined the offer with a single verse about the unattractiveness of the body. So the Buddha gave kind of like a teaching direct to the point. It's like, sure, you're beautiful, but don't be so vain, yeah, because the body itself is actually very foul, very unattractive. So, so this verse wounded Māgandiyā's vanity, but it had such a profound impact on her parents that right on the spot they realized the fruit of non-returning, which is great. Her parents on the spot actually realized that teaching itself. Not Māgandiyā though. So Māgandiyā took the Buddha's rejection of her as a personal insult and came to harbor a bitter hatred against him. Because the Buddha kind of was like using the example of the foulness of the body to try and teach Māgandiyā and her parents Probably maybe the Buddha used that as a skillful means because maybe he realized that the parents' minds were ripe and ready to receive such a teaching. It could be the case. Um, but obviously, because Māgandiyā herself is very beautiful, she would. Uh, well, again, different people, different, right? So when we read the story of Nanda, last week, she was also very beautiful. Um, but and initially she didn't care too much about the teachings of the Buddha, and she tried to avoid even, when the Buddha said, okay, everybody in the monastery come see me to receive further instructions in your practice. She actually avoided going to see the Buddha initially until the Buddha pointed her out, and then she could, no choice. And then when she eventually came to be in front of the Buddha, then the Buddha gave Nanda the teaching on meditating on the foundness of the body. And over time, she actually, gained enlightenment. So different people, different. Yeah, in Māgandiyā's case, was the opposite. She came to harbor bitter hatred against the Buddha. Took, she also took the Buddha. Well, probably because in her case, the father, Māgandiyā's father, out of ignorance, offered the daughter Māgandiyā to be the Buddha's wife. But of course, the Buddha was like, no. And so she, obviously, because Māgandiyā is quite vain, and she already had other people wanting her hand in marriage, she took that as an insult. So Māgandiyā took the Buddha's rejection of her as a personal insult and came to harbor a bitter hatred against the Buddha, a hatred she could never overcome. And later her parents brought her to King Udena, who fell in love with her at first sight and took her as his wife. So the King Udena is, yeah. I guess he, is attracted to physical beauty more often. Okay, but anyway, let's assume that these women in this particular story are indeed very, very beautiful. Okay, so then that's not unlikely. So King Udena took Queen Māgandiyā as the second consort. Then when the king took a third wife, which is Sāmāvatī, she could willingly accept this as it was customary for the kings of the period to maintain several wives. But that Sāmāvatī had become a disciple of the Buddha and she had converted the other women in the palace to the Dhamma, this she could not tolerate. So initially, okay, the king married someone else. She's like, okay, that's fine. But then eventually, this Sāmāvatī, she's like, wait, hang on a second. Not only the king married her, now this Sāmāvatī is also a disciple of the Buddha whom Māgandiyā hates so much. And on top of that, on top of all this, Sāmāvatī had the other women in the palace also become disciples of the Buddha. And this was like, to Māgandiyā is like, okay, I can't tolerate this. So her hatred of everything connected with the Buddha now turned against Sāmāvatī as his representative, unfortunately. So Māgandiyā sought up one mean deed after another. Because she was beautiful and she was clever, but she was also cold. Yeah. So unfortunately, this is a classic example of someone who uses their beauty and cleverness to conduct misdeeds, let's say. Okay, so this is one example. So first, she told the king that Sāmāvatī was trying to take his life. So first she came up with a fib, she came up with a lie. She said to the king, actually this Sāmāvatī is trying to kill you. Okay. But this King Udena, was well aware of Sāmāvati's great love for all beings, so that he did not even consider this accusation seriously, barely listened to it, and forgot it almost immediately. So the king, because the king knew, when the king first knew Sāmāvatī, it was also because he was very impressed with her Metta, her great Metta for all beings. So someone who has great Metta is quite impossible to kill another being, right? That's why the king was like, that's just a lie. That's not possible. Impossible. Okay, so he totally forgot about it even. Then next, Māgandiyā ordered one of her maidservants to spread rumors about the Buddha and his monks in Kosambi, so that Sāmāvatī would also be maligned. That means she asked one of her servants to go and say something bad about the Buddha, bad about the monks, spread lies, false rumors, so that because Sāmāvatī is also a disciple of the Buddha, she's hoping that Sāmāvatī also will be her reputation will also be affected. And with this attempt, she was more successful. And a wave of aversion struck the whole order of the monks to such an extent that Venerable Ananda suggested to the Buddha that they leave town. So this rumor became so great that a lot of people were upset with the Buddha and the monks. So Venerable Ananda suggested, okay, then no point we stay here, let's leave Kosambi. And the Buddha smiled and said that the purity of the monks would silence all rumors within a week. And hardly had King Udena heard the gossip leveled against the order, then it already subsided. That means by the time the king heard about the rumor already disappeared. Didn't really didn't really well, wait, that's my desk. I'm just pulling up and down. Maybe I should oil it a little bit. So then Māgandiyā's second attempt against Sāmāvatī failed. All right. Then, sometime later, Māgandiyā had 8 specially selected chickens sent to the king and suggested that Sāmāvatī should kill them and prepare them for a meal. So Māgandiyā is asking the Sāmāvatī to kill those chickens. And Sāmāvatī refused to do this, as she would not kill any living beings. Now, since the king knew of her all-embracing love, he did not lose his temper, but accepted her decision. So the third time, Māgandiyā also failed. Then Māgandiyā tried for a fourth time to harm Sāmāvatī. 3 times unsuccessful, she won't give up. She tried again. So just prior to the week which King Udena was to spend with Sāmāvatī. So I guess here I'm guessing that the king rotates amongst his queens, amongst his consorts. Yeah. So Just prior to the week which the king was to spend with Sāmāvatī, Māgandiyā hid a poisonous snake in Sāmāvatī's chambers, but the poison sacs had been removed. And when King Udena discovered the snake, all evidence pointed towards Sāmāvatī. So the king's passionate fury, I guess the king does have a temper, and out of his anger, he made him lose all control. He reached for his bow and arrow and shot at Sāmāvatī. But through the power of her loving kindness, the arrow rebounded from her without doing any harm. And his hatred could not influence her loving concern for him, which protected her life like an invisible shield. So I guess Queen Sāmāvati's practice of metta really is very, very strong, very, very strong. So much so that she's actually protected from harm. And when the king Udena regained his equilibrium, that means he regained from his temper and he saw the miracle that his arrow could not harm Sāmāvatī, he was deeply shaken. He begged her forgiveness and was even more convinced of her nobility and faithfulness. And he became interested in the teaching that had given such strength to his wife. And just about this time, a famous monk named Pindola Bharadvaja, Pindola Bharadvaja came to stay at the Gosita monastery. So the king visited this new monk and discussed the teaching with him. And he inquired how the young monks could live the celibate life joyously. And Pindola explained that according to the Buddha's advice, they did so by regarding women as their mothers, sisters, and daughters. And at the end of the discourse, the king was so impressed that he took refuge in the Buddha, and then the king also became a lay disciple. Okay, so we will pause here for this week. There's another half, we're halfway, and there's another second part to Queen Sāmāvati's story, how her practice of loving kindness, metta, is so great, as we've already seen some examples, yeah. But we will continue this rest of her story in the next reading. Anyone has any thoughts they'd like to share, or any questions, anything at all?
Thank you very much, May. I have heard some of the stories you mentioned, but you have kind of coordinated the whole thing. That's very interesting. Thank you very much for choosing this and reading it. This is great.
Yeah, to be very honest, I've not heard of Queen Sāmāvati's story myself. But yeah, possibly it's more popular in some other, that I'm unaware of. The versions that you've heard before, are they similar to the one we just read? Madam Nanda, just wondering, with the versions of the story on Queen Sāmāvatī that you've heard before, are they similar or more or less the same to what we just read?
Yeah, similar, more or less the same, but I didn't know the connections, how Samavati became a queen and how Māgandiyā became the queen. So the story you said is very interesting. Everything fit in. I have heard about in isolation, few of the things you mentioned.
Okay. So I guess it's thanks to Venerable Nyanaponika Thera and Hellmuth's research. They probably digged further deeper into the different
Yes, yes,
mm,
yes,
and then put it all together for us. So yeah,
yes.
it's a great piece of work that has is still very popular after several decades. So yeah, it's a great piece of work that they've done. Okay, so if there are no further comments, we shall end today's session by uh, sharing the merits of today's reading. So let us share the merits together. May suffering ones be suffering free and the fear struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share in this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, all right. We shall stop here for today and we will continue next reading next time. Take care, everyone. Bye bye.